Welcome, guys. Welcome to Fiat Lux. Today on the show, we have Dr. Paul Dylan Ennis from Polarpunk Labs. Paul wrote an introduction for an Agorist Journal, so we're going to jump straight into it and we're going to talk about agorism and what it is. So, welcome, Paul.
Thank you, and very glad to be here.
Glad to have you. Let's jump straight into it. What is agorism?
So this is a complicated question because it's not really an area that many people have researched or showed interest in historically. Agorism, it's associated with a guy called Samuel Konkin III. So he died in 2004, just to situate him a little bit historically. And there isn't a huge amount of information about him at all. And I don't mean just online, I mean even in books. So he's a fringe figure. He lived in a place called the Anarcho Village, which is this science fiction commune in California. He influenced a few science fiction writers in the 80s. And then he has this very patchy online record. He has like a LinkedIn profile, which just says that he does publishing in some vague way. And he produced these three books, or they're sort of half books, half pamphlets. So one is called The New Libertarian Manifesto from 1980. That's the only book that's published in his lifetime. And then he wrote two books, which were then put together by his friend Victor Coleman in the sort of 2008 and 2018. So that's Agorist Primer and Counter Economics. So there's a book called Radicals for Capitalism, which is this 800-page book of about American libertarianism. And Konkin is mentioned 3 times in this book, right? So that will give you a sense of his status. And I would say he almost could be a forgotten historical figure completely, except for the fact that for some obscure reason, when we don't know how this person found Konkin, but the person who found Konkin is Ross Ulbricht. So Ross Ulbricht, the creator of Silk Road, the darknet marketplace, he, for some reason, found Konkin and tried to get people on Silk Road to read his book. So that's how I came across him, and I found it fascinating that this major figure in cryptocurrency history had an interest in agorism. So that's how I sort of began the journey. Now, he's an interesting character because his books are intentionally not systematic. So we're not talking about huge volumes. We're not talking about lots of complicated libertarian analysis. He's maybe similar to someone like Hakim Bey, a little bit more controlled, where it is I don't know, he's not concerned about his appealing to the mainstream libertarian audience. So the general thrust of it is very direct, which is just that agorism is the promotion of black market activity. So the message that he's promoting is that black market activity is a net good, and the another way that he puts this is counter economics. So he talks about the idea of counter economics, where you're doing any kind of activity, any kind of black market or gray market activity, which is effectively running counter or not sanctioned by the state. And he sees this as a way to express your truer non-statist self. So he's encouraging people to reject their internalized statism, the way that they follow, say, the rules of the economy. So he basically says that most rules are, related to the economy. It's like a Marxist sort of strain in there, perhaps. But generally speaking, yeah, his idea is that you should engage in this kind of counter-economic activity. So if it takes place beyond the state and it's non-violent, then Konkin is for it. So in his work, he'll praise U.S. libertarians, the people you would expect, the right libertarians, the Bitcoiners that we would see today, the American flag, the guns, the whole lot. But he also supported things like the WTO riots in Seattle. So he had a broad view on this. He really would support anybody that was opposed to anybody engaging in illegal activity. He also tries to encourage consciousness raising around people who are already engaged in counter-economic activity. So people who are already, let's say, like naturally inclined in that direction. He supports, those people learning that the counter-economic activity they're engaged in is actually like the good as opposed to the bad as they've come to accept. So there's a little bit of a prefigurative aspect to it. So, live as if you're already free is a big part of his thinking. And then the formal definition that he gives in the book, I think it's the Agorist Primer, is it's the consistent integration of libertarian theory with counter-economic practice. So an agorist is one who acts consistently for freedom and in freedom. So he accepts more or less all the basic ideals of traditional libertarianism, so like voluntarism, non-violence, pro-market, socially permissive, anti-state, anti-war. So all that bucket is in place. So beyond, like with his theory is effectively just libertarianism, the standard libertarianism, but then he's just got this unique focus of saying that if you believe in that theory and you're not living in the non-state, off-the-grid, true libertarian or true anarchist life, then you cannot consider yourself an authentic libertarian. And his books are, I guess in today's context, you might even say he's trolling the libertarians by living this life, because he did live that life. He was very much off-grid and never worked any sort of official jobs. And so he's trying to show the hypocrisy. And then the other part of it, and again, right, he's not a super systematic thinking, it's more almost playful and creative. There is this interesting part, however, where he imagines the way in which if we encourage counter-economic activity and zones of counter-economic activity, like temporary autonomous zones, any part of the society that's attempting to live beyond the regulations of the state, that we should encourage the creation and development of these zones so that they undermine what he calls the contiguous territory of the state. So the state has its territory, and then there are these zones. He talks about ghettos, like his word, so places that can't be governed, to try and encourage the expansion of these places until they basically meet up. So it's almost like a science fiction vision of this counter-economic spaces which eat away at the territory of the state. Now, the part that I think Ross Ulbricht probably would have been interested in is that the way in which this is going to be brought about is through groups called the New Libertarian Alliances. So these are associations of entrepreneurs for liberty for the purpose of specializing, coordinating, and delivering libertarian activities. So you have this idea of groups of libertarians will get together. They will operate and coordinate and try to bring about, counter-economic zones. So trying to expand that, and then they disband at will, and they sort of come and they go. And to me, this is where I begin to see like a little bit of crypto in there. To me, this sounds very much like a DAO, like a decentralized autonomous organization. It's a group of people get together for some specific purpose. They expand the range of counter-economic activity, which is what I see crypto effectively as. And then beyond that, really after that, he just gets very science fiction-y. So he straight up just begins describing something that hasn't happened, which is he imagines the growth of these zones, and then how the state goes through these terminal crises as people look at the authentic people living in the counter-economic world, and they get drawn over, and then eventually like the state collapses, so that's as far as he gets. So in summary, and I know I've kind of given a bit there, but he doesn't get much time, so I guess I might as well give him a bit of space. So it's the promotion of black market activity. That's the main thing. Valorizes counter-economics as an expression of our true selves outside the state's watchful eye, which we've internalized. Promotes the widening of the counter-economic participation. So that's sort of the main, I guess, politics of it, to expand the zones until the contiguous territory of the state is eroded by these autonomous zones. And then eventually, this is maybe the Marxist, I often see little parallels with Marx in his work, that if counter-economics, like if all the zones met up, like counter-economics would disappear because it would just become economics, and that would be the agora. So the agora is the point where the counter-economics supersedes the economics. That's his view. These are very small books, so that's pretty much like it, if you know what I mean. There's not a huge amount more.
Yeah, that the way you described the nature of the autonomous zones and the kind of disbanding of them, I guess it's a little reminiscent, at least for me, of the way in which the militias in the early Americas were described. Sort of, there's not this one overarching army, and when there is a need for an army, these militias kind of come together, and then it's disbanded after a number of years. At least I think that was the original intention. And again, they would be organized together if they had to fight some kind of foreign enemy. But individually, there were these sort of autonomous movements, these collections or these groups of individuals that were, trained to fight or ready to fight. I think I like the idea of living as if you're already free. I've always kind of liked that idea, and I think that is one good way to kind of spread the message of freedom and personal liberty and autonomy and things like that, because it's always good to show other people so they have an example to draw from. So on that note, why would you say agorism or things like counter economics are important? Why is it important for people? Or why did at least Konkin see it important for people to do these things? Why was counter economics and agorism important for society?
Yeah, so this is where his work has its limits. So we don't really get any expression beyond, say, just traditional commitment to libertarian ideals. So that's where I think he isn't, say, the most expansive thinker. But what I think, where I think it maybe relates to, say, crypto in general, is that if you think about something like crypto, which has similar aims, right? So the aims of crypto, like you could argue that the aim of crypto, at least in the beginning, was to expand the counter economy in terms of money, right? So we create this black market counter economic activity, which challenges the fiat currency of the state. And then, to them, the end goal would be hyper Bitcoinization, where basically we transition away from the old economics and we end in the new economics. And then I also think an interesting connection between them is that you have this idea of, say, parallel building, or like parallel zones or autonomous zones. And I think if you look at then, if you say we go up a little bit and we look at Ethereum, we see something like the attempt to create decentralized analogs to state functions. So DeFi is a form of decentralized, basically it's a form of finance that is being pitted against the centralized version of it, so that's sort of the appeal. And then with DAOs, it's organization, and then with NFTs, it's art, with art probably being a little bit overlooked normally, but I think that's probably essential to the spirit of any real functioning society. A society without that kind of art, without any real appreciation for art, is probably not on the wrong sort of path. So I like this idea that you can read cryptocurrency as the creation of these counter-economic zones that are operating in parallel. And then what they're doing that Konkin talks about but doesn't really give you any examples of. So he essentially says, right, that people will look at the agorist zones, they'll see everybody living free, and they'll think, okay, I want to live like that, right? So that to me is the way to be. But I don't think that's really, that realistic. I think most people probably have more of a preference for safety. We see that very, very commonly. But with crypto, once you add in, so crypto is a rare example where I think that's actually where there is actually some attraction, where you're saying to people, we are offering you something like, let's say, the ability to participate in finance, which you're normally excluded from because you're not an accredited investor, and that you may not even ever have thought of engaging in because you just presumed finance was for Wall Street, right? So before crypto came along, people didn't think, most people, the kinds of people you find in crypto today, right? Humanities people, social sciences people, everyday people, retail, just normal everyday folk. These are people who up until 2010, which is the era, I guess, of the financialization with, say, Wall Street bets in the mix here as well, essentially just saw themselves as excluded from all of this kind of activity. And I see a similar thing with DAOs, where DAOs essentially says, well, you've effectively said at a certain point that I don't engage in self-governance, or that our communities don't govern in any real any real sophisticated manner, that kind of organization is for institutions or is for, large scale organizations. But we could do something similar like that. And then same with NFTs, where you have the sort of established centralized art world, which says that this is the appropriate way to do art. And, you can come along now and you can give yourself royalties using smart contracts. So I think there is some, like, what he talks about doesn't really exist in his work, but in what we have with crypto is something like what he was hoping for. Interestingly, he does mention the possibility that in the future there might be, he says, if we can lick the encryption problem. So he has this just one small reference, but of course caught our eye because it's like, okay, he uses the word encryption. He talks about if we can find a way to use encryption, we could have markets which allow us to transact in a way where the state couldn't track us. So he did have some inkling, of maybe the direction it was going in, but probably had no idea just how out of control what Nakamoto built.
Yeah, it's a great explanation. I think you kind of pointed to the idea that these systems, this way of being, let's call it, is sort of, in some sense, at least seen by the people that someone like Konkin, they see that this is a more freer expression of your I guess individuality, your personhood, and I think one of the reasons that I would say that these things are important is that people, as you said, they're sort of unfamiliar with markets and things. They don't realize that maybe they don't realize the freedoms that are available to them that can be had, and they also maybe don't see the sort of counter arguments to, like you said, these kind of safety concerns and things like that. I think what people don't understand is let's call it, like the gunk in the system, right? And when you look at like the crypto markets, personally, I think I was probably one of those people that for many years did think that, the financial markets were for the elites, and, it was super complicated and hard to get into and hard to understand. And as a young kid or a teenager, you see the tickers on the TV and you see the candlestick charts and all this kind of stuff, and it all looks dead confusing. And you see the guys in the suits, and you think, well, it's for the elite, right? It's for people that are mightier than thou. This is obviously complicated stuff. And yeah, to your point about, bringing the crypto economy has brought a lot of people into markets and enabled them to understand the inner workings of markets. One of the interesting things I heard Balaji talk about was price discovery, and that people are now learning how prices are made, basically. You can see this kind of war on the order book. You can see people battling it out. So I always thought that was a really interesting concept. And also, one thing that people might not know about traditional markets is that there's what you call an open and a close, and there's also aftermarket hours. And that's, at least in my view, it's not a great thing for people that want to just interact with the markets in kind of a general way, because it only enables people to interact with the markets at certain times. And what you find out is actually there are people that can interact with the markets out of the times that other people can interact with those markets. And so, in my view, crypto is just more fundamentally free. How did this Agorism Journal begin? What was the motivation for the journal?
Yeah, so a close friend of mine, Rachel Rose O'Leary, she's Ireland isn't a place with a huge crypto footprint, but one of the, I guess, more well-known, I'd say, influential people would be Rachel. So she's a developer with a project called DarkFi, along with Amir Taki, who's a pretty legendary early anarchist Bitcoin developer. And the two of them have been working on a project called DarkFi for a couple of years now. So they're building a layer 1 blockchain. So it's not sort of just like a fly-by-night token thing you can just build. It's right from the ground up. So they're trying to build a completely anonymous layer that would work for DAO. You could have like a purely anonymous DAO, purely anonymous DeFi, etc. So very difficult kind of project, but I think it's getting close. But one of the things that their project is interested in is, you know, philosophical ideas, right? So they have a on their website. If you go to their website, you'll see these blog entries where they're, you know, engaging in discussion about, let's say, you know, theory, politics, which is something you don't see a huge amount of in contemporary crypto projects. In fact, they would probably steer away from this, but in the early Bitcoin culture would have been quite common. And then Amir, coming from that generation, I think he still like believes that there should be a political direction for the project. So when when Rachel came to me, I think they originally wanted to do a book, and I suggested maybe a journal. So the idea with the journal would be not just to, you know, get the message of DarkFi across, but to try regenerate political discussion in the space. You know, like to generate like political discussion again. So to have to me, it's kind of strange that we don't have a space that is dedicated to ideas anymore, you know, where people reflect on, say, the difference between solar punk and lunar punk and cypherpunk and all these different terms. They do get used quite a bit. You'll see them on Twitter. They're identifiers, they're shibboleths, they're markers, they're, you know, rituals almost, you know, that people kind of say, I'm a regen solar punk. But there isn't a huge amount of reflection on what those things really are. And so I thought that it would be good to have a space for that. And then we were thinking, so the DarkFi project, they're lunar punks, which means that they see I'm probably bamboozling people with some of the terms here, but the lunar punks are maybe privacy-oriented people. And instead of just calling themselves cypherpunks, which is maybe a little bit old school, they've introduced this new term, and it also nicely contrasts then with the solar punks, who are very, you know, maybe more optimistic and don't concern themselves as much with the war of attrition against the state. So rather than having it being a lunar punk journal, we were like, okay, we'll have a general, but then we need something to hang it all together. And then I recommended, well, you know, Konkin's description of agorism is applicable pretty much to any type of crypto idea, and itself doesn't have a following. You know, it doesn't have a huge amount of people. It doesn't really want people to follow it. Like, you're not really supposed to be an agorist. You're supposed to be someone in a counter-economic autonomous zone who believes in something libertarian-ish. But for him, he's more the general describer of this type of activity. So I thought that was a perfect way to you know, frame what's going on. So you could say all the activities, all the solar punk, all the cypherpunk, all the regens, all of those people are agorists in some way, even if they don't identify with that, you know, term.
So I've heard you talk about Ethereum, and you just kind of spoke to this a little bit, and how it lacks an obvious or clear political philosophy. Can you maybe speak about why you think that is?
Yeah, so I think this is actually like my fundamental interest. So every person, I think, has a question that they obsess over. Or like maybe not. Sorry, every academic is like this. Normal people don't have a question they obsess over all the time like this. But academics, they usually have something which drives them. And my question is very simple, and in a way, it's supposed to be a little bit alarming. Like, I'm using it in a way where when I'm giving talks or giving presentations, I'll try to lead with it to shock people a little bit. And the question is, like, what is Ethereum for? Because nobody knows what Ethereum is for. And to me, that's a sort of fascinating thing that you can wind a lot of questions and discussions around. So if you look at Bitcoin, and I would have started as a Bitcoin researcher, right? So all my articles up until, I don't know, 2017, maybe 2018, are on Bitcoin. And I was effectively today, the calling yourself a Bitcoiner today now has a lot of connotations, right? People think you're a maximalist and all that kind of thing. But I would have been effectively a Bitcoiner in the pre-maximalist, normal-ish sort of way. And when you were a Bitcoiner, you knew what the politics were. So you know that Bitcoin is, Lana Schwartz, she's an academic, she says that Bitcoin is a theory of society. So it's a theory about the collapse of the fiat society. So the fiat currency will collapse, and that this will lead into hyper-Bitcoinization, or the transition into the Bitcoin economy. Now, hyper-Bitcoinization didn't really exist as a term then, but you didn't really even need to say it, right? So it's just the idea that Bitcoin will essentially displace the fiat currencies, which are, you're also throwing shade on them and saying that they're effectively worthless, or they're paradoxical or contradictory. So Bitcoin's politics relatively well known. You also knew the kinds of things that informed Bitcoin. So you knew that there's a story that Bitcoiners can tell each other about the Immaculate Conception. So Nakamoto coming in, he appeals to the cypherpunks. He writes to the cypherpunk mailing list. We know that these are digital privacy activists. They engage in a big infrastructural project. The infrastructural project, a collective collaborative effort to build a digital cash with anonymity properties, which, eventually we discover, okay, maybe it's not as anonymous, but that was the belief at the time. So there was a feeling that what you were constructing was a genuine, what today they would call a public good, right? So you were building a public good, except it was, wasn't in maybe the Gitcoin sense, but that is what you were thinking. And then on the other side of it, you had this idea of crypto anarchy or crypto anarchism. So cypherpunk, I think, if Bitcoin had been purely a cypherpunk project, right, it was just appealing to other open source digital privacy enthusiasts, I don't think it would have taken off. I think it's the fact that it also has this other community which comes in. They blend as a hybrid, and then that seems to pollinate into something special. I think that's the mix. I think you need this crypto-anarchist influx. And the crypto-anarchists are just the libertarians, right? It's that Austrian economics, deflationary gold, scarcity, all that, we all have come to know and love by, through Bitcoin. But one of the first formative experiences of learning about Bitcoin is learning about the libertarian economics, basically. And then those two together, they both have a healthy disrespect for centralization. So you know that decentralization is a core principle. You know that censorship resistance is important. And you also have this belief in what in the academic literature is called algorithmic authority. So this is the idea that instead of trusting in people, you trust in the code, right? You trust in the fact that you trust in the network plus the blockchain plus proof of work, and you disintermediate any kind of human corrupt influence. So you have a huge backstory, you have a history, you have a lore, and you have an end game as well. So your end game is clear, and your enemies are clear. You know who you're opposed to. You know who your adversaries are. And in a way, that's sort of become a bad thing because now Bitcoin has morphed, I would say, too far in that direction. Like it's essentially mutated into so much of an us against them that everybody is an enemy. So even the adjacent community, their neighbors in crypto, are seen as like just as bad as the Federal Reserve, which I think is just way too over the top. And then if you look at the founding of Ethereum, which is not something people discuss as much, right? So people don't talk about Ethereum's beginnings or the history, the lore in the same kind of way. Effectively, what happens is we tell the story through the story of Vitalik, right? We use Vitalik as this cipher for a tech innovation genius type story where he is a Bitcoin magazine contributor. He writes these kind of early nice Bitcoin kind of articles. Then he's in the mix with a group of people who were at the time we were called Bitcoin 2.0. So this is Mastercoin, colored coins, name coins, a lot of forgotten projects that your viewers won't have any interest in. But all of them were trying to do. All of them were looking at the blockchain and saying the same thing, which is Bitcoin only does one thing and one thing well, which allows you to send and receive a unit of account called Bitcoin. Can we do something more interesting, like what maybe like ENS today or DAOs or DeFi, all the projects that we eventually discovered? These were the people trying to figure it out. Vitalik looked at all the options and he said, well, all of them fail in their own way. So if you look at the white paper, you can see him sort of deconstructing all the different options. Okay, so now we're going to have a general purpose computer. So the definition of Ethereum in the white paper is effectively like a general purpose computer for or a platform for decentralized applications. And that's a way different, type of story, right? There's no like transition beyond Ethereum to some political state or, replacing the economy with some sort of Ethereum type of economy. Instead, you're talking about something closer to a tech innovation project. He improved upon the blockchain concept and added in interesting things. So neutral infrastructure, the neutral infrastructure sort of narrative then is the closest thing you get. In DevCon, the early talks at DevCon, you can see people talking around this problem a little bit. So Gavin Wood, who a co-founder of Ethereum and then founds Polkadot later on, he has a talk, and this is where I got this question. His talk is, now that we've built it, what is it for, right? So now that we've built it, like, what is Ethereum? And he's searching around, so he's giving an introduction to Ethereum, and also, like, during the talk, basically asking the audience, like, well, not asking them, but you can see this sort of question in his head, like, what have we done? And then he says, he gives us the world computer image, more or less, there. So that's where that comes from. So we have the world computer, and then it has lots of generic, sort of properties, but again, it's very tech oriented. So it's only over the next couple of years, I think that was okay. So the idea of a neutral world computer that you could build dApps on was fine. But then when the first wave of ICOs came, so when we saw that actually the main use case for Ethereum was simply to create more tokens and speculative financial frenzies, and this is what got mainstream attention, that's when people start asking, actually, really, what is Ethereum for? Like, is it to, like, as the Bitcoiners are now starting to say, simply to create more tokens in this, like, sort of Ponzi game? So the question takes on a new meaning, and then Vitalik starts getting an interest in things like radical markets. Glenn Vile, he engages with those philosophies. Quadratic funding, that's where that comes from. But that's as far as he goes. What he gets into is always so the criticism I have of Vitalik is he will typically retreat into technical solutions to like hard political problems. So every time, like, somebody tries to broach what would, let's say, a society built on Ethereum principles look like, he'll usually then sort of move back into, well, we'll create, like, new experimental governance methods. Like it will go into something like quadratic voting, quadratic funding, or Georgian land taxes, real esoteric kind of things. So so to me, it's sort of fascinating that it's not really clear. I do think that there are different groups that are pushing toward it. So the solar punks, I think, are trying to stake their claim of Ethereum should be this regenerative public goods platform. Griff Green, I think it's Griff Green who gives this talk where he talks about what we should do is we should create public goods that are so good they embarrass the state. Like, we'll fix the potholes, the government will look bad, and then the only thing that the government will have left are the bad stuff, right? The prisons and so on. So people will go against it. So that's one answer. I think that's a pretty good answer. The lunar punks could be another answer, right? We should turn Ethereum into essentially this, like, a ZK sync, zero knowledge proof privacy platform, and so on. And then my own personal view is I think what Ethereum already has, this idea of being a neutral platform. I think it would just help to really give it a bit more of a name, give it a bit more of a sense of what the society would look like. So I put forward in the past mutualist minarchism. So it's a mutualist project of trying to allow for the creation of public goods, collaborative public goods, but then it's pretty hands-off about how people live beyond that point. So just trying to put a little bit of flesh onto, instead of saying something like, general purpose computer or, a platform for dApps, we begin expanding it and saying, well, in society, actually Ethereum would be a form of mutualist minarchism, or could be. So sometimes in recent talks, in fact, in relationship to Balaji and the network state, Vitalik has talked a little bit about the idea of Ethereum as a substrate for communities. And I think that could be a fruitful benefit. So, so I don't think I have any clear answers for it. I just think it's a really fascinating question, like what Ethereum is for. And it's sort of amusing, I think, that we don't. I think it should be more of a center to the conversation than, say, scaling all the time, or, scaling for what?
Yeah, I completely agree. And maybe it's possible that in some way the kind of idealistic nature or origins of something like Ethereum is the reason that it kind of has this problem, right? That you're trying to create this decentralized, autonomous, mostly leaderless kind of technology and philosophy. And because of that, because you're kind of withdrawing or trying to stand back from the process, it kind of has no clear direction. Maybe that's just inherent to the way that it was set up. But then, that being said, in contrast to Bitcoin, maybe less so now, but in its origins had a pretty clear political philosophy, quite a clear direction, and that had no leader, and that no one knows who Satoshi is. So, I mean, it's interesting to think about the contrast there, that they both kind of have these ideals, but one kind of muddied the water a little. Not to say that hasn't happened to Bitcoin as well, but it does seem, at least on the surface, that Ethereum has a little less clarity. And I think, just to go right back to one of the things that you said, about a couple of minutes ago, about Bitcoin, the belief that Bitcoin was private. And I think I definitely saw that a lot. I was in the community quite early, and then exploring these black or dark markets. And you would often hear people say things, like it's untraceable, or X, Y, and Z. But I think, at least at that time, it was de facto anonymous. That was kind of the downfall, in a sense, that people didn't differentiate between actually anonymous or private and de facto. And then the reason it was de facto is because it was so niche that the government didn't really know about it yet. And so in that sense, it was private, like no one was watching you. But it's always been very interesting to me to look at the reality of that, how it's sort of de facto anonymous, versus the technology itself that is clearly public. So that was always interesting to me, that people talked about it not in those clear terms, like, oh, it's de facto anonymous, but once the government finds out. But you would think that, understanding the tech, seeing what it does, knowing that it's a public blockchain, you would think that would be quite obvious from the beginning, right? Like, it would only take, some, the FBI, the CIA, whoever it is, to find the technology and realize, oh, all these transactions are public, and we can analyze these. And then, now we've got like AI and transaction tracking. So, but on that note, I think I'd like to ask you whether you think the counter-economic activity of this crypto space as a whole is a net good. Because I know you talked about, maybe, your personal view, maybe you'd like Ethereum to be a little more clear, not so much so that it's like some ideological thing, and that they're hardcore about X, Y, and Z. Maybe just like a little more definition, a little more clarity. But one of my thoughts has been that maybe some people come for the money or the tokens or the NFTs, the pump and dumps, but maybe they stay for the community and the values. Maybe they get lost in there. And as you said earlier, most people kind of want security. And so, you have to just accept that, 80%, 70%, 90% of the people that come are guess going to, buy some NFTs, sell some NFTs, and not really change the values. But there obviously will be a percentage of people that will be influenced. Maybe they go into Ethereum, they realize the flaws of Ethereum, and then they move into Bitcoin, or they move into something like DarkFi. Maybe they go to Bitcoin and then they go even further and realize, wait, Bitcoin has flaws as well. So yeah, I'm just wondering, do you think it's even though we could put some effort towards making the space better in terms of its privacy and its direction and things, do you think it's generally a net good despite these flaws?
Yeah, and I think this is the
it's sort of like
probably
a pragmatic approach,
Yeah, and I think this is really one of the hardest questions for crypto people to answer. And the reason why I kind of like these questions, this is probably the teacher in me, but like asking simple things like, what is Ethereum, or like is crypto a net positive, right? Like, that question is like extremely difficult to I mean, what I often find with it is that actually my first reaction is probably no. And then I begin sort of retroactively justifying it in my head, sort of like, so I don't know whether it's just like I'm so psychologically invested So when I'm tangling with the Bitcoin maximalists, I often throw that at them. That like they'll ask a question, say about should Bitcoin be X, Y, and Z, and I'll just say, well, I'm so psychologically invested in Bitcoin that I believe, therefore I believe we should stick with it, kind of thing, So there's a sunk loss fallacy situation. So my retroactive justification, so where somebody would I'd really try to defend it, is the first thing I think is crucial in trying to explain why it's at least worth people's attention. So even if you don't want to be involved in it, I think it's important for people to understand it, so that people learn about let's say where crypto came from, why it exists, all those different things. And the reason for this is that I see crypto as essentially a symptom. So crypto is the kind of thing that wouldn't exist in a healthy society, right? So like if our society was much more functional, if it was much healthier, if there was much more financial equality and inclusion and opportunity, if there was that sort of access in society where instead of looking at the tickers on Sky News and the guys in Wall Street, and where they're essentially like symbols that are partially excluding people. They're saying like this is a life of privilege you cannot even hope to reach. So I think crypto emerges, like the attraction of crypto. Yeah, so that idea that crypto is attracted to people because it is a little bit of a gamble. So it's why are so many retail people involved in this, flipping NFTs or etc. It's because of the dire financial situations drives them into making extreme gambles and bets with their money, which they shouldn't have to do. This is so it's like similar. At least that's the first way that I tend to think about it. That it's a structural or systematic failure of neoliberal capitalism that leads to crypto. That is that's the cause. And if you begin the story in the middle, right? So if you say to somebody, Sam Bankman-Fried, or maybe you're talking about like Bored Apes being robbed on OpenSea or something like this, you're in the middle of the story. So it's scandalous, right? You're in the scandalous part of the story. There's a good article by a couple of guys, I can't remember their names now, but they said one of the most interesting things about crypto is the tendency for the mainstream media and commentators and no-coiners to scandalize things in a very individualistic way. So to focus on individual scandals and basically repress any analysis or discussion of the like what crypto say is or what it represents overall. And I think that's probably the first thing I would always try to say, that we should try to begin the story with the cause of why this thing exists. And I even throw that out there that in my ideal society, something like crypto probably wouldn't exist. Like I feel like there's probably better ways to organize, but that we find ourselves trying to having to create alternatives, analogs, decentralized versions, ones that we can actually manage ourselves because we are so alienated from the institutions that exist at the moment. And I think especially in a world where, and here's where things can get very tricky, is that right adjacent to all of this is a rise in, say, alt-right populism, which is sort of if you're not getting into, say, stuff like crypto and you're looking for an outlet, you're probably involved in things like that, right? So if you're not, like, say, on the left or something, then like that's sort of another direction. So we have all these outbursts of basically mistrust in information, in institutions, and in society. So so that's usually where I begin. I call all the scandals. I wrote an article a few years ago for CoinDesk called the Trash Mo. So the red top media stories, all the stories that make their way out to the mainstream sort of media, the Sun, the Mirror, all that kind of thing. If you can get past that, then you can discover the community. So the next part I would say is that idea that what a lot of people are seeking is community. It's a sense of belonging and being involved in something authentically, genuinely, and where they are in control of it, right? So you're in the current configuration of society. How do things work? You've got your home life, which is already intruded upon constantly by different pressures. You've got your work life, right? So you've got your your sanctions, things that you're supposed to do each week. And then there's a real lack of what they call the third place. So I don't know if you've ever heard this idea before. The third place, most societies used to have something like this where instead of being at home, instead of being at work, you could go and hang out somewhere. And this was the third place where you met people who weren't part of like your stresses, So it was a place that maybe like a good example that still exists today would be people who are interested in football and go travel to matches. That's like a third place
Maybe a
experience.
social clubs, things like that.
Yeah, social clubs, but like they do exist, of course, right? There's people who go to book clubs, whatever, but it's not really so. It's less and less common, right? There's a lot of people who, for some reason, just feel that I don't know, they like that. That actually kind of going out there and involving themselves in society just seems to be more and more difficult for people. Whether that's related to like more anxiety and malaise and in general that you see everywhere, sort of pervasive. And so into that mix, I do think then, yeah, that crypto, especially its online nature, is very attractive to people because you can sort of jump in. You can decide to basically back something randomly, right? So you get on, all of a sudden you're a moderator in a Discord for an NFT project and you have friends on, you're doing like community calls and all those kind of things. So the ownership of your time and activity, being able to direct things, multi-sigs, all those things which seem like a generic technical, almost incidental pieces of technology, I think are very important. The sense that you could just start a DAO, and if you've ever done this before, there's a really fun, like a really interesting thing of, on the internet, suddenly you're sending ETH to a smart contract and there's 4 or 5 of you. You don't know anything about each other, but you're managing like your little community treasury, which might be very small, but it is a sense of like you did it yourself. It wasn't from your work and it wasn't from your sort of home life. So I think that's crucial. And I think the other part of it, another reason why I think that's not necessarily saying that that's my justification of it, but again, just fitting into the idea of why I think it's worthy of analysis. It shines light on how bad the situation is economically and how bad the alienation is in general. And then the other thing I would say on the positive side is that I do think it is very, very important for any society to have zones of like governance experimentation. That you never want to be in a situation where governance is simply accepted as whatever happens to be like the governance system that's in place in your society. Because when you think like it's similar to the way that we look at the financial system used to be very opaque, and then people got into Wall Street bets and they discovered stock to order flow, they discovered all these different things about how it really works, and then they begin doing it themselves. I think what we're seeing with the governance side of it is also an example of that, and I think that's where we might see some of the positive direction over the next few years, is that people are beginning to get a sense of what actually it does it mean to be governing. What does experimental liberalism look like? What does it mean when you're instead of being a passive observer of governance, you're suddenly seeing like the temptations and how things might get skewed and how people might try to game the system in DeFi, for example. So I think that's a crucial thing. I think that's like a consciousness raising example. So yeah, that design space I think is important. So that my current mantra is only the DAOs can save us now. So I think in the corruption that I see, say with I basically see Bitcoin maximalism as the article I wrote recently, the decline and fall of Bitcoin culture for CoinDesk as well, where I call them QAnon Bitcoin, Uncle Bitcoin. So the Bitcoiners have become more or less sort of like your conspiracy theorist loving, Joseph Lubin and Vitalik are secretly controlling Ethereum and stuff like that. And they've become very right populist, unfortunately. So I see that as a bit of a lost cause. I see decentralized finance as a little bit of a lost cause. I think there's despite the fact that you've got this beautiful idea of permissionless finance, there seems to be something in that space which I don't know, whatever, like I think the way it is now is just like dysfunctional, and there needs to be some new primitive that comes in and like reimagines it. So I can't even think about what that is, but for now I'm sort of like, okay, maybe that's not the best direction. But in DAOs where there is at least the possibility of organizing without the constant financialization of everything, that presents the opportunity for reimagining sort of like governance, which I think then could feed back in to say like DeFi and could feed back into NFTs. Once people begin feeling once there's like a lot of accumulated know-how and knowledge for governing in a way which is fair and discourages the sort of like the rules, the scam, the quick buck. I think that's sort of our only hope. So I do still have faith that we will invent ourselves into something better.
Yeah, I think I like the way that you put that these experimentation zones. And I think one of the things that the current system of governance or government suffers from, at least from what I can see, is that there isn't much experimentation. Typically, you'll hear about a UBI pilot written in the Guardian, and it's an article that's 4 years old, and it was tried in Hampshire in some small village, and it's not like very public. The public aren't very really involved. And so yeah, I think that's one of the things that always struck me as impressive and exciting about the crypto space is that there's just constant innovation, there's constant creativity, people always trying to solve problems. It's every day, and every day there's a new project out. Not that all the projects are good or valid, or exist to benefit people. There's obviously a lot of scams and things out there, but amongst the plethora, amongst the chaos, these things emerge, and I think that's it's extremely healthy. And just to talk about the Bitcoin issue with the people, the populist movements, and the conspiracies and things, or at least not to talk directly about that, but this relates to that. One of the things that I don't think people are aware of is that these sort of like Bitcoin maximalists. If you actually look back into the writings of the early devs and Satoshi, and the early community, things like smart contracts were actually accepted. Satoshi was exploring those ideas in his posts, and people often forget that. People want to badmouth Ethereum and screw Ethereum, we don't need the smart, we just need the sound money and all this kind of stuff. But they forget that it wasn't just Bitcoin that people were talking about. The early movement was talking about, as you mentioned, like Mastercoin, things like that, different coins, altcoins and things, and smart contracts and DAOs. These have all been ideas that were foundational to the origins of the crypto story. And it's kind of sad that people have forgotten about that, and that they think the opposite is true, that Satoshi would be appalled by what the smart contracts and the DAOs and what Ethereum and Bitcoin has become. And maybe you would in some sense in this sort of like global like macroeconomic, like who owns it and how is it, these mining companies and things. But I think at least creatively, I would imagine Satoshi would be quite happy about at least the amount of different things that people have created. And on that note, we've talked a bit about Bitcoin, a bit about privacy, DarkFi, organizing DAOs. I'm curious to see what you think about this emerging idea. I mean, maybe it's not quite new. It's maybe a couple of years in the making now. But I'm interested to see what you think about the idea of digital or decentralized identity. And because obviously that's, at least in my understanding of it, is going to be moving forward fundamental to the organization of DAOs and meritocracy inside of DAOs, and being able to verify people's credentials and things to make sure that they're fit for their role inside of the DAO. On the flip side, obviously, I could see, depending on how it's implemented, I could see how that could cause issues. It's not always good to have everything immutable and assigned to an identity. And obviously, the immutability discussion is one that's being had, right? Like we talk about permissionlessness and immutability, and as you said, you kind of like work backwards. Sometimes when people ask these questions, you work backwards, and that is one thing to think about. Like, is it good that everything's just always going to be there? That it's ossified. Is that actually a good thing? Is it a good thing that we always have to go through these mechanisms to do? Is permissionlessness a good thing? Do we actually want everyone on? Do we want some requirements? But yeah. So I'm interested to see what do you think about this kind of new wave, let's call it, of decentralized ID?
Yeah, I'm pretty fascinated by it because the other thing that I teach is like cybercrime. So cybercrime would be so you can probably see the connection. You know, it's kind of handy to study both of them. So you can pull examples from crypto every week. Um, and in cybercrime, what you get is a sense, I guess, of the dark side of how identity, say, currently exists. So the way that we treat identity now is um, a little bit flimsy, I guess. You know, it's very ad hoc. You know, you sign up to websites, you're like putting in credit cards into databases. You're giving your phone number to all kinds of people. And yeah, we just have a very lax sort of attitude towards it, and we don't really know where that information goes. Right? It goes from our perspective. It goes into the internet, and we get like whatever we're ordering. That's all we care about. And if it's Amazon, maybe it's not going to be an issue. But if we're ordering from a smaller shop, you know, it's probably being sold in some darknet marketplace for Bitcoin at the moment. You know, so I do think that. When I'm thinking about it, I often do have that in the back of my mind, that I do like the idea of having an identity where it is a more of a MetaMask experience. So let's say that my identity at least could be partially like maybe like with a zero knowledge proof. So these things that are emerging where, you know, you can sort of reveal the information without actually giving all the information away. So maybe just like a little hash of the information so they know it's you, and then they can interpret that on the other side in order to like send you some goods. So this is like my ideal like future outcome of where that could go. So I do like the idea of having control of your identity in that kind of way, where if you do decide to reveal it to people, you're effectively just revealing, instead of addresses and names, you know, just like the public address, right? That kind of thing. But then you get into the other problem, which is the one that you're mentioning, is that you begin to accumulate essentially a blockchain record. So now you've got so you've dodged the problem of like random companies with their lax security properties storing your information, and you've replaced it with I don't know. Let's hope that we don't end up with an authoritarian regime which just looks at my blockchain record and reveals the terrible things that I've been doing on chain for everybody to see. So this is where so the identity system that I think needs to emerge, the way in which we're going to have to look at this, and I think this is like an education thing that's going to take a lot. I don't think this is going to happen anytime soon, but we effectively need to have two. We're going to have to, or more, like we're going to have something that is our official, like state or government public identity. So like let's say if you're looking at it, I'm using MetaMask as an example just because most people tend to use it, but like you pull down your MetaMask, you know, account one would be like your government account, and you're happy for every action that everybody sees on that to be public, whether that's when you're active in the DAO, whether that's when you're going to I don't know, the dentist appointment, or whatever like futuristic scenario that we have where this is going. But obviously from a pure crypto perspective, like we can't simply have a system where like that's it, where you just have like a transparent, complete blockchain record that anybody can identify and then surveil as they wish. But if it's going to be necessary, then the next best thing is to have one that is essentially siloed, you know, possibly even has its own wallet, so you're never even mixing it. You know, it's just like this one wallet that you're using for official business. You only take it out when you're doing something like signing up to government stuff. So I do think we're going in that direction. Maybe you have one that's for public participation in DAOs. Maybe you even have like NFTs that are for courses you've taken on Rabbit Hole, which means you can now get a job at a DAO as a contributor, the cool stuff like that. So this, I guess, would be the more solar punk vision. Gitcoin, they're sort of introducing some identity systems along these lines as well. And then retroactive public goods funding. So where people are actually doing good stuff, they could actually be rewarded for it, I think, as well, in a public way, you know, rather than just getting like tokens. They could be rewarded by earning positions of influence, like a steward or a delegate in a DAO. But I do think, yeah, we then definitely have to have other identities which are absolutely completely separated from those. And so the next phase, not the next phase, but a phase that's coming up at some point is going to be blockchain literacy. So where people are going to have to understand the nature of their identity and how the identity needs to be broken up. If you go back to the early cypherpunks, they don't really talk about pure privacy, pure identity. They talk about selectively revealing yourself. And I think we need to like think along those lines where it's not that you're a ghost, you're not off grid, you're not like you can't, it's not a situation where you can't be found. You need to be found if we're going to replace the institutions and the structures with our own versions, our own analogs, but it's going to have to be a little bit more conscious. Now, the problem with this is that we know from private keys and storing and how people treat, crypto wallets and stuff, that this is going to be like a hell of a education, because somebody will come along and offer a service that manages all your identities, and then they'll get hacked or something like that and reveal everything about you. But I do think that that's the situation needs to be like a blockchain literacy coupled with siloed identities is probably that's the solution that I would probably vouch for.
Yeah, there's an interesting way to maybe look at the issue in the future. As you said, maybe you have one government wallet or one government account, and then you have your kind of personal and private interactions, separated from that main government account. I would imagine the government account would be for things like, I guess any kind of maybe moving cross borders. You would use it for that. A DBS check, which for the sort of global audience is basically like a criminal record check. When you go for a job, some jobs require you. Maybe if you work in a school, or maybe if you work at a hospital, something like that, you'll be required to do what's called a DBS check, and then you actually have to pay for that, which is, I guess, something that interests me in the crypto space in terms of these the friction that it reduces in the system. So that kind of like ZK identity idea, at least to me, seems to be appealing because it would remove some of the frictions in things like the DBS checks or the credit checks or things like that, where you have to essentially ask the government or ask whoever manages the credit checks, whoever manages credit scores. I don't think anyone knows who does. I mean, but yeah, you essentially have to ask them for permission to get the information or the data that represents you and your identity and how your mobility in the world, which is always strange. Like I say, the credit checks have gotten better, but it's only been in the past couple of years that you've been able to do free credit checks, and that there are apps and things. At one point, it was so ethereal, it was just ridiculous. It was like, you go to try and get a not credit line, but you get some credit on, buy something from the store from PC World, or wherever you want to buy an expensive computer, and you have a debit option or credit option, sorry. And maybe you get rejected, and there was kind of no clear way to assess that situation and rectify it. It was kind of like,
Yeah,
okay, go ahead.
Another good way of thinking about this is like with banks and mortgages and things like that, where your financial situation is like you really don't know until you like basically turn up and there's somebody in the bank and then like goes and pulls all these like random records from God knows what kind of obscure databases that builds up a picture of your financial picture. And I often think those types of interactions, like the one you're talking about, where it's very one-sided, in a curious way, because you are talking about yourself. You're seeking information about yourself, and then there's somebody who works in a bank, or somebody who's basically building up this profile, which they don't reveal to you. It's a shadow profile, and they're just telling you like what they can offer in response, or they're allowing things to happen according to algorithms that are again unknown to you how they work.
Yeah, and also the fact that there's a charge for some of these things. A lot of the friction in the current system, and this is one of the things that I really like about crypto, is the digital native aspect of it. A lot of these things with the DBS check and the credit score and credit checks and all that kind of stuff, the friction is created by admin fees or admin duties. Sorry, and then you are charged admin fees, but we know now that we live in a world where information is basically free, and we can transmit and transfer information at the speed of light, might as well be, and so these services are kind of they're like clinging on to the dying world, and they're like trying to justify themselves. Oh, well, it's an admin fee. Well, what does that mean? You have we have you're transferring this it's on a database. You're copy and pasting, or you're sending packets of data over the internet. Maybe your internet connection costs you $30, £30 a month. Like, it's not expensive. Like, I think a lot of the friction and stuff is caused by that kind of aspect, that it's not digitally native, and that they're still like trying to claw onto the old world, and there's still this paper. It's not paperless. There's all these papers, and like you said, they go into some like cabinet, and they pull out all the old records, and like, okay, well, this is you, and this is your information. And so, yeah, one of the things, I mean, at least from the centralized perspective, it would be to kind of like digitize that, right? And I think obviously we are moving into that world. As I said, there are now apps that where you can check your credit score and things. But to me, the better solution is just to start again. And obviously not with everything, but that's again why crypto is appealing to me, and I think is good for people, because it is an experiment in an alternative system where we've built it from the foundations to be different, and so we're not having to like necessarily deal with the old world as much. It's not like this constant tension between like, oh, we can't do this because the old world doesn't allow it, and then we have to factor that in our designs and on our innovations in the crypto space.
I think the blockchain era, the permissioned blockchain, the attempt by companies to basically gentrify crypto and talk about the underlying technology behind Bitcoin, all that kind of thing, which for me actually worked out, because essentially I was hired and allowed to build classes under the pretense of teaching blockchain, but was just teaching crypto classes, but calling them blockchain classes. But during that era, and I never had any interest in like these different, say, solutions, but the decentralized sort of blockchain stuff that they were farming out and promising the world under. But I did always think that the one core good idea that really should have come out of it, and that I did see sometimes, would have been this idea of like a public-private key identity, like replacing all your documents. And so I would have been quite happy with at least that idea had have taken hold, where like you genuinely are in control, like all your information. So you've got this private key, and you're sort of then deciding to reveal it, and then also that people can like ping you or reach you at this identity would have been a cool thing as well. So like if the government, as opposed to scammers, who are like sending text messages to your phone, were trying to reach you, like they would actually be reaching out to your public address, which could be very private as well. Like, I mean, obviously it could end up in databases and stolen and stuff, but I think at least it would have added a layer of security. So I guess that was my only disappointment, that at least some of the ideas didn't seep out.
Yeah, and just to add, maybe we can finish on this. I want to add a little anecdote in here, maybe to explain or educate people to some of the potential benefits of the crypto space, and why we talk about this friction, and the benefits that we do talk about, I guess, are not necessarily obvious to people on the outside. And you said like this sort of crypto literacy coming in, and hopefully we kind of see that phase. I think that's really important, because in a lot of my conversations with people that don't understand crypto, they'll point to things like PayPal, or well, I have a Venmo, I have a PayPal, I have a bank app. Why do I need this? And I mean, maybe this isn't a reason why you would need this, but this little anecdote definitely relates to what we're talking about. I was using my PayPal for some freelance work, maybe about a year ago, and after a certain threshold, a certain amount of money is transferred through your account, you have to do KYC, which is something everyone in the crypto space is familiar with. And for those that don't know, it stands for Know Your Customer. And so essentially what happened is they asked me to provide identity documents, and I provided them with my passport, and maybe it was a proof of residence, something like that. You just snap 2 pictures, one of your passport, one of a letter from the local government, or a bill from your energy company or something. And what happened is, and this was definitely automated, and then maybe this speaks to like the scary nature of just to link it back to the decentralized ID idea. What happened is, within 5 minutes, my account was locked, and then I received an email saying now we basically what they were saying is now we know your actual age because you when you signed up you didn't have to KYC. Maybe the laws were different back then, or maybe you don't have to KYC. Or you never have had to until a certain threshold of money is reached being transferred through your account. And what they said is basically you opened this account when you were a minor, and therefore this email and this account is now this email's blocked. You can't use this email again on PayPal. And your account is terminated basically, like it's just gone, you know. And while it's not that big of a problem for me to create a new PayPal account, although it would be nice to use my professional email because that's one of the ways that people can transfer money through PayPal is to send it directly to your email. It would have been nice to retain that. But what really bugged me was just thinking about the kind of far-reaching consequence, like what was underlying that. You know, it wasn't like, oh, I've lost a PayPal, big deal. That wasn't what the part that kind of frustrated me was. It was the fact that it was something I did over a decade ago, and you're punishing me for it now. And why is that? Because there's a record in a database somewhere, and then when it was cross-checked against my identity documents, they managed to work something out, and then I was penalized or punished for that. And you can have it's up for debate whether that's okay that I started my account when I was a minor. That's a different conversation. But just that idea of being able to be punished for something you did 10 years ago and how they were able to do that was quite frightening and like I say, frustrating to me. And so one of the things that is kind of cool about crypto is that it's permissionless and that things like that don't happen. Like I could start up a new wallet, no one can stop me. I can transfer money from one wallet to another, from one person to another, no one can stop me. There's no overlords cross-checking my information against a government database and saying, well, you did this 10 years ago. And again, this isn't necessarily a problem that people run into. But like you said, sort of in the beginning of the show, it's kind of crypto is maybe it's like a response to the traditional world and the issues, or it's like a symptom. And I think in the same way, that's what, all of these symptoms will become clearer. So that was one example that kind of, I guess, boosted my confidence in the crypto space. I thought, well, yeah, here's a clear example of why we need things to be permissionless and why there doesn't need to be a third party or trusted intermediate. So yeah, I guess just to finish on this, maybe could you talk about maybe any anecdotes like the one I just presented, or are there any things that you think should really be that you really want to educate people on in terms of why this space is actually useful, maybe in general, or you could give specific examples if you want, but I think there is a big issue with the education of kind of the mainstream cultural society and looking from the outside, they kind of don't understand. So if there are there any things you think that you would like to point to that clearly demonstrate like why this is a necessity? Why should people give two craps about this?
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up PayPal, because they used to be the bane of my existence when I was a freelance editor, when I was a PhD student. So this used to be a constant tangle that I had. So very often around limits on accounts as well. So that I remember breaching, I think back then it was like €1,500 or something. And then that was what triggered it. And I remember that day because it was a big day in terms of me just realizing, oh no, like it was the first experience I ever had, I guess, of being really punished, by some faceless organization or something, because I was kind of young enough and only really getting involved and having to manage these things myself. So yeah, and another, like, anecdotally on that front, so a big issue that I also used to have with PayPal is they would constantly block my cards because I was buying crypto. So it got to the point where I would swap out the cards. And then eventually what they did is they said I can't add any more cards. So I reached my limit of cards. So basically like the account just became useless because you couldn't, unless you wanted to do like bank transfers, you know. So at that point I was crypto pilled. So I was like, there's no way I'm waiting 3 days to do something. And then another big sort of constant source of problem around that is with was with my bank as well. So this was a similar situation where I'd buy Bitcoin or crypto on like back then might have been maybe like Coinbase or something, like, you know, a fairly, you know, main, like not like a weird exchange, you know, like one of the fringe ones. And I'd buy, say, €50 worth of Bitcoin back then, you know, like, because that's, you know, it's like I'll see what happens kind of thing. And then my account would get blocked, and then I would ring them up and I'd say, you know, my account's being blocked. And they said, oh, well, someone's bought Bitcoin. I'd say, I bought the Bitcoin. And then, you know, a couple of months later, I do the same thing. I'd buy like, you know, 200 because now I'm thinking, okay, like this could be something quite big. And then they would do the same thing, and then I'd ring them up, and then this happened, you know, maybe 6 times. Like I thought that if I bought it from Coinbase, you know, 6 times, eventually they would stop. But each time they would you know, block me, and I just got into I just got into a routine where it's like, if I buy crypto, I will get blocked, and then like I would do it in the evening on a Sunday because I knew then I could ring them on Monday and get my bank back before I had to do anything. So I asked them, like, can I like just say to you guys that it's me buying the Bitcoin, like I'm the person buying the Bitcoin, and then from now on you don't bring me in. I take responsibility for anything that happens on the account. And they said no, they can't do that. And that was one of these moments, I think, for me as well, where I realized that even if I said to them that I will take responsibility, my own responsibility, so thinking like a Bitcoiner, thinking like a crypto person, that forever happens, they just wouldn't allow me to do it. So I felt like that was like a real babysitter moment for me, where I can't make my own decisions. I'm like literally not allowed to buy something legal because the bank thinks it's like suspect, even though they have a very obvious pattern of like, it's clearly me kind of doing it over and over again. So yeah, and I imagine this was true for everybody. I think anybody who bought Bitcoin at that time was just getting completely shut off. So the other aspect of this, which I'll just throw out very briefly, is the idea of when you were talking about your documents. You know, when you sign up to something, you need to give your documents, like say a recent bill and your passport. So from the darknet market experience, I'm quite familiar with the way in which you know, these documents are very, very easy to manipulate, and very, very easy to like you can get like a Virgin Media bill where you can pay a guy. He'll have a scan. He'll create like one of those for you, you know, tomorrow, if you're getting like a fake driver license in the real world. If you have the you know, the social engineering skill to actually walk into a real place and try to do that, you know, that's not like a hugely difficult thing. It's just that most of us, like the only reason that kind of fraud isn't more prevalent is because most of us are good people. But it is one of those crimes where the protections against us, our identities being stolen, is very weak. And I think that's another thing just to throw out about in terms of trying to make something a bit more secure than, you know, pieces of paper that we take pictures of and upload to the internet. So yeah, with all that in mind, I think the powerlessness is what kind of comes through there for me. So when I'm thinking about, you know, my final thoughts, and even when I'm in my, let's say, the class and I'm having the final lecture, I do tend to really just focus on this idea of the design space and the experimentation. The fact that that crypto is not that, it's starting to get a little bit old, but it's not that old. And there is a tendency of people to really forget what has been achieved. Like they're so in it. So we're in the fishbowl. We don't know we're in water. And we are under such constant pressure and critique from people that are essentially saying that it's like a, you know, failure, or it's a scam, or, you know, you're sort of like deluded for even being into this thing. And yet at the same time, we're surrounded by a whole other bunch of people who are like, we have to keep going. It's really important. These are very, very important ideas. So I do think, yeah, then that the motivating factor, whether that's just because you're interested or because you're involved, or in my case, a little bit of both, that it is good to remember, right, that we didn't have decentralized money 15 years ago, so 13 years ago, that is an extraordinary achievement to create a post-state decentralized money that could be used in extreme circumstances like Navalny, or in Iran, or in Ukraine, those situations. So even if Bitcoin, you know, never becomes anything more than that, as long as I think that itself is actually quite valuable. The fact that there is some money that cannot be seized by the government, you can still be inactive. So I would always say that in itself is almost like worth the experiment. And then looking at Ethereum and then what Ethereum enables with the decentralized analogs, so like these new possibilities for organization, things like the public goods focus, right? Introducing these ideas of, would it be possible to do public goods provisioning ourselves instead of relying on the government? There's a real seed of like serious potential for political organizing hidden in there, where people begin twigging to this idea of, actually, could we like solve our own political problems, which is a very, very anarchist idea that's hidden in there. Maybe it's sort of hidden in the fact that, you know, we're only funding like public goods of open source now, but eventually I think that will expand. And same for DeFi and NFT. The reason I can't really give as much examples is because they're just like not my main sort of focus. And then the other way I would tend to think about it is, imagine it didn't exist, right? Imagine there was no alternative. We just completely erased the history of crypto. We would effectively be ignorant of like the extent of like our like the problems that we actually face institutionally. So we know a huge amount about like how flawed they are. We know a huge amount about the impacts they have. But a lot of the knowledge that we've gained has actually come from this crypto experiment, and mixed up with other ones like Wall Street bets. And if it didn't exist, like if you went in your bank and then you just got your bank shut down, you would just look at it and say, well, that's the situation. Like, banks do that. And you wouldn't have anything in your head to compare it to say, well, actually, there's another possibility of permissionless finance or identity that we could do. So another world is possible, wouldn't even be in your head. You'd just be accepting of it. So I think that in itself makes it also worthwhile. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I agree. And it's almost like, seems like a learned helplessness. Almost like you said, well, that's kind of what banks do, and what can I do about it, the little man? And which is really unfortunate. I don't think that's like a healthy way to view the world. You should want to be able to change things, or at least seek alternatives, or support alternatives. Excuse me. Yeah, and I also think a lot of the views of crypto, or kind of like the lack of education on some of the things you just talked about, are essentially down to I guess, Western, and I hate using this word, but a Western privilege, in that we don't experience what the road sweeper in Ghana experiences, right? We don't know what it's like. For the most part, obviously, people travel and things, and we experience other cultures, and we live vicariously through movies and YouTube and music, etc. But yeah, people don't really have a proper reference point to understand the power and the freedom and the autonomy that the space brings. But having been in the NFT space myself, I used to run like a small community, and we would have Twitter Spaces every day, and 90% of the audience was foreign. It was not English native speaking, not from the UK or America, and just seeing how it, and hearing people's stories, and how people were making money on their NFTs, their art collections, in order to support their grandfather or grandmother who needed some medication, and that wasn't being provided by the state or by the hospitals, or maybe not even the local community. And so having actually experienced and seen that impact that the space has, and the freedom that it provides firsthand, I think is really important for people, like, to really wrap your head around it. Just like being able to send, a couple sats to, some guy in the middle of nowhere that doesn't have a political party or a government that's established, doesn't have the infrastructure and all this kind of stuff. Just being able to just do that, without any friction. And I've done that multiple times. I'd even do peer-to-peer NFT trades, I suppose you could call them, where someone would just say, hey, can you send me the money? And granted, right, this is sort of taking you back out of the trustless nature and back into the trust realm. But But it was super cool that I could do that, and I could interact with this person from another country where I knew that it would be a supreme difficulty for me to send them money or pay them for their goods or services in the traditional world. Like, there's no way that I was sending this person $10 through my bank account to their bank account. It just wouldn't have, like you were saying before about, the bank sort of flags things up as
they probably should both your bank accounts,
Yeah. So yeah, I think we're gonna wrap up now. I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for coming. You're super interesting, dude. I'd love to have you back again in the future, because I know you have a lot more to say, and I'd love to talk maybe more about some of the other subcultures, because I know that you have like a big interest of yours, and I'm very interested in all sorts of different libertarianism. You mentioned minarchism, anarcho-syndicalism, anarcho-primitivism, all the anarchos. I'm interested in all of those, and even on the right, the left, the center. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff, and obviously crypto is kind of rife with different political philosophies and things. So yeah, I'd love to have you back. And just before we end the show, where can people find you if they want to explore these ideas and engage with you or your community? Where can they go?
First of all, thanks for having me. And the great thing about subcultures is that you never get to the bottom of them. So that's what I always enjoy. So you can find me pretty much everywhere as Polar Punk Labs. So Twitter, probably the main place, GitHub, and then Lens. I'm trying to get on Lens.
That's awesome. Okay, well, thanks for coming again. Thanks everyone for watching. You know what to do: like, comment, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, blah blah blah, and we'll see you guys in the next episode. Peace.